was the motivation behind you making that motorcycle trip in the first place?
You know, Mel, I don't guess there was any quote, motivation. It was something I've been planning for almost 2 years. I've been riding a bike most of my adult life. Never had an accident, but it's something that I just wanted to do. I've talked to people before, read all the motorcycle magazines about going to the Arctic Circle. So I said, if I'm ever going to do it, then I need to do it now. So left that morning, and I told George Talbot with the Press Register, I said the first 5,200 miles was the best trip I have ever been on. The last 30 feet, not so much, but it was just a fantastic trip. You meet some of the most incredible people, especially when you're traveling by yourself. When you have a southern accent like I have, I can order breakfast in a cafe in the morning and everyone in there will come over and sit down and talk to you. But the scenery was probably more spectacular than I had ever realized. And I told somebody the other day, they said, well, knowing what you know now, would you do it again? I said, absolutely.
Is that right?
It was probably the greatest trip that I've ever been on.
What kind of motorcycle were you on?
It was a Harley, big Harley.
And it's your own personal motorcycle?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Was.
Well, can you describe to us the circumstances of the actual accident?
Yeah, this is one of these things, like I said, I've been planning it for years. And I wanted to go up and go through Chicago, and then the weather was great, so I went through Iowa, Wyoming, went up through Montana, then up through the Canadian Rockies. Most beautiful place I've ever seen. I've never seen as much wildlife in my life. But then when I got to Fairbanks, I had told myself, if it's raining, I'm not going to get on that dirt road that goes from Fairbanks up to Prudhomme Bay. But I got up that morning, it wasn't raining. It's about 195 miles from Fairbanks up to the Arctic Circle. And I've always said I'd like to go all the way to the Arctic Circle because once before I had gone to Key West, as far south as you could go. Well, about an hour into the ride, I'd gone about 80 or 90 miles and it started raining. Well, then you're halfway there. What do you do? So we went on up, and there was a young man from Chicago that had ridden beside me for probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours. We'd met at a service station, and he laid his bike down, tore it all to pieces. But we flagged someone down. They had some tools, so we got his back to the point that you could ride again. But by that time, it had gotten so slick, so slippery, that we sat there and we said, well, we've got to go back. So we made it to the Arctic Circle, got our perfunctory pictures made in front of the sign, then turned and headed back. We probably went 70 or 80 miles, stopped, filled up with gas, because there's not one gas station up there. And I remember going across the Yukon River. And once we did that, that's honestly the last thing that I really remember. I remember it was so slick that even on flat ground, you give it any gas at all and the back end would just begin to fishtail. So, a couple of guys, one of them that I met at that gas station left the same time, was paying their bill the same time I paid mine, so he was right behind me. And when I had the wreck, he said, you just laid it down. And once we laid it down, next thing I remember, somebody said, can you sit up? I said, sure. I sat up, and they said, are you hurt? I had this riding suit on, and I said, well, I don't think so. But then I stood up, and I said, yeah, something really hurts on my right side. And they said, well, get in the back of the pickup. Let's go to the hospital. So the nicest two people you'd ever met. I mean, these drove me probably an hour and 45 minutes to the Fairbanks hospital. When we got there, he said, "Can you stand up?" And I said, "Sure," and stood up, but at that time I just blacked out. I lost a pretty good bit of blood on the way there, and stayed out for probably 2 or 3 minutes. By that time, they started giving me some blood and some other things, and came back around.
But you were conscious all the time you were in the back of that pickup truck.
Oh, yeah. There was a dog back there named Shadow. He was back, that dog must weigh 120 pounds. But he loved on me all the way back. And I talked to Delaney, and she was a school teacher up there, and we talked about everything. And talked about the reading programs we had in Alabama. She was a supervisor up there, and we talked about everything that they were doing in education, what we were doing here. The guy that was driving the truck, her boyfriend, he worked for the Caterpillar company. And we talked about Caterpillar, and I know the guy who owns the one in Birmingham. And
but when did you let them know that you were the former governor of the state of Alabama?
They asked me, "What are you doing up here?" And I said, "Well, I retired back in January. And since I retired, I wanted to do this trip for a long time, so I just left." And they said, "You by yourself?" And I said, "Yeah." And they talked again and said, "Well, what'd you do in Alabama?" And I said, "Well, I was in politics." And then the obvious question is, "Well, what office did you hold?" And I said, "Well, I was the governor of Alabama." And you could almost feel that pickup accelerate. And when we got there, he said, "I got some guy here who thinks he's the governor of Alabama. Y'all need to get him in there." So, but just the nicest people. They came by to see me once or twice after that in the hospital, and just couldn't. Everyone that I met up there, I mean, I am not exaggerating, they were some of the greatest people. We talk about Southern hospitality, but the people in Alaska, I think, at least with me, they matched it.
Well, look, since you made it all the way to Alaska, I'm thinking that was your goal. Do you feel like this trip was successful?
Oh, yeah. I've got a picture at home that I gave George down here, and it's standing in front of the Arctic Circle. And I don't know, maybe it's age or whatever it is, but I said, you know, gone all the way to Key West. Now I want to see if I can go as far as I can to the north. But big bikes, at least for me, you know, on a muddy dirt road, if I had it to do over, I'd probably still try it, but it got to the point that it was just extremely difficult for me to hold it up.
Once again, describe the surface of the road where you had the crash.
Have you ever seen this movie or this TV program, Ice Road Truckers?
Yes, yes.
That's what it is. And it's a dirt road, goes from Fairbanks, like I say, it's 190, 200 miles up there, but it's just a chert road. But what has happened over the years, there's been so much petroleum, so much oil, so much, I don't even know how to describe it, but there's a coating on it that's about that thick. And when it gets wet, it is the slickest thing that I have ever tried to ride on. I told somebody, I said, it was almost like trying to ride on ice. But anyway, it was still a great trip. If I would encourage anybody that loves to ride a bike to try to do it and go on the same trip that I did, go up through the Canadian Rockies. It really is one of the more spectacular things that I've ever done.
And you say you would do it again.
Oh, yeah. The only thing that I hate, I made it up there, but then I wanted to come back down to Anchorage, and I was going to put the bike on a ferry and then take that ferry back down to Seattle. Then I wanted to ride the Pacific Coast Highway from Seattle all the way down to San Francisco and then hang a left and come back home. that's still something I want to do.
Ooh, okay. Well,
I don't think there's any dirt roads between Seattle and San Francisco.
well, I tell you what now, you look absolutely great, but as you noticed from us, our reaction when we saw you, you look a lot better than we anticipated. So,
And you're making my day.
so how are you doing, and do you and doctors expect you to make a full recovery?
Oh yeah, I think so. My collarbone was broken. It's about healed now. But they tell me, you know, your ribs will heal. They didn't have to do surgery or anything else. My kidney now is doing good. The punctured lung, they got it back up. It's doing fine now. Biggest thing I have to do now is just get over just the soreness. I was telling these guys a moment ago, I used to watch John Wayne on television. He'd fall off a cliff, get shot in the ribs, and get on a horse and ride off. I'm not nearly that tough, buddy. These ribs hurt probably as bad as anything I've ever had happen to me.
Okay, so, but you don't appear to be any real pain now.
It's like, oh, not anything like it was up there for the first 2 or 3 weeks. But no, now it's not the type of excruciating pain it really, it's just like having a bruise or something. It's just sore, but they said, you know, it'll heal. And doctor said it'll probably be 6 months before you just get up one morning and don't think about it. But other than that, doing great.
Well, again, you look great. Now, let's get back to the state of Alabama a little bit here. Have you been keeping up with the events in Alabama since leaving office?
Oh, sure.
Such as the bingo corruption trial and our tough new immigration law.
Yeah.
What's your position on those tough new issues, starting with the tough new immigration law?
You know, we talked about doing that 2 or 3 times when I was governor. And I think Rick Perry kind of summed it up the other night. There's no way that you can control your country if you can't control your border. And how we do it, whether you build a fence or whether you do it with technology, I don't know, but you've got to do something. But we've also got to recognize that even once you close it, there are people here that have been here for 15, 20 years. There has to be some accommodation made to them. The people that I've talked to all over North Alabama really do understand that there has to be something done. Would I have signed it if I was governor? Yes, I would, because you have to get to the point that the states are going to have to hold the federal government accountable. Arizona's doing it, Alabama's doing it, Georgia's doing it. I don't know what it's going to take ultimately to get it back to the point that we have complete control of the border. But if the states don't do it, and the administration refuses to do it, then someone has got to stand up and say, you know, enough's enough. We want to be able to dictate for ourselves in Alabama what is enough. And I think they did.
The bingo corruption trial ended, of course, in a fashion that the prosecutors weren't looking forward to. Of course, we have 2 people who were acquitted totally. We have retrials for others, but we have no convictions at all against any of the defendants. Did that surprise you?
For most of the trip, I was on the road going to Alaska, but I did read the press accounts every day. But one of the things, Mel, is I don't think a lot of people understand, but I have never had a conversation with anyone in the federal government. Didn't know that they were going to do this, didn't know. So they've never asked me, I have never asked them. I really don't know what they had, what they didn't have, but I also trust the jury system. And whether or not what evidence was there was presented correctly, or I can't comment on that. I have made it an absolute point ever since they announced the indictments that I wasn't going to comment on the merits of it. The only thing that we did, and I still think it was very successful, someone asked me the other day, was it worth $3.9 million to go through what we did with the task force? And I said, absolutely. It's probably one of the most successful public safety initiatives that there's been in Alabama. John Tyson and what he did with that task force really was incredible. At one time when we started that, there were 100 casinos in the state of Alabama. Slot machines in the state of Alabama are illegal. Doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it bingo, you can call it a football game, a basketball game. It's still a slot machine. Well, today, none of these illegal slot machines are operating in the state. Someone with the Attorney General's office said the other day there were 38 cases, of which the state now has won 34. And of those 34, the state of Alabama has never lost an appeal, ever. So if the people of Alabama ever get to the point that they want to legalize it, that's fine. But as long as it's illegal, you can't just turn a blind eye and say we're going to allow something that is just blatantly illegal to continue to operate.
I understand that now you are a lobbyist. Could you tell us what a lobbyist is and what you'll be doing as a lobbyist?
Absolutely. One of the things, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but partisan politics is pretty strong in the state of Alabama. And I went ahead and registered for some companies that I'm working for today. For the last 14 years of my life, I have worked, and I think have been very successful with all the people, Joe Morton in education, but I still want to take it another step further. Alabama for a long time was 48th, 49th, 50th in education. The year that I left, we were 25th, but we can be in the top 10. There is no question in my mind we can, but we're going to have to continue to push the programs that work. And one of the things I want to do is do what Governor Jim Hunt did in North Carolina. They were about like Alabama, the 48th, 49th, the 50th. It took them 12 years, but today, North Carolina has got a system that's as good as anyone. Alabama can do that. But Jim Hunt, after he left office, set up an education foundation. And he brings people in from all over the United States, literally from all over the world, Democrats and Republicans, and they talk about education. And they talk about what we need to do to make it better. Well, just because I'm out of office doesn't mean I'm not going to continue to lobby every member of the legislature whenever I can for what I think is right for education. Same thing goes for economic development. There are companies in Alabama today that have an option to go anywhere in the world and produce a product. I want them to stay here. I have other people that I've met over the last 8 years that I'm going to do everything I can to get them to come here. So whether it's education or economic development, whether it's ethics reform, all of these things are very, very important to me. And I'm going to continue to be as active as I can to help these companies expand in Alabama, come to Alabama, to build an education program that's second to none anywhere in this country. But in order to do it, you have to talk to the people that make the rules, and I'm going to do everything I can to continue things like the reading program, our math and science program, distance learning. I mean, it really is revolutionary. I'm trying to get 2 or 3 people to come down maybe this fall to kick this foundation off. But in order to do it, in order for us to have everything that we're going to need, we need the senators and the representatives and the governor, everyone to participate in these conferences. Jim, I think, has a couple a year, and that's what I want to do.
You know, in some circles, lobbyists is a dirty word. And some would argue that as a former governor, that it would be somewhat of a conflict of interest to be a lobbyist. What are your thoughts on that?
All the time that I was in Congress, all of the time that I was in the governor's chair. Lobbyists are just like anything else. It's according to what you're lobbying for. You know, I don't think I'll ever lobby for something that I don't believe in. But the things that I do believe in, you know, as long as I can, I want to continue to be an advocate for what I believe in. I want to continue to fight for it. Just because you move from being a governor to back as a private citizen, in a lot of ways, you can be as effective doing what I'm doing now as you could when you were in elective office.
And speaking of elective office, you know, a lot of people never say never, but would you ever entertain the thought of entering into elected office again?
Well, somebody said never say never because you never know what's going to happen. But I have no intention of ever running for office again. Last week, I've got 8 grandkids. I went to a volleyball game. I went to 2 football games. I watched my granddaughter lead the band in Homewood High School. It really is so different than what I had become used to for the last 8 years that Patsy and I talk about it. We'd kind of forgotten it because when you're the governor, every hour of every day is pretty well filled, and you make your schedule months in advance. It has really been kind of nice and refreshing now to be able to get up in the morning and say, you know, Ren's got a ball game this afternoon, let's go to it, and do some of the things you want to do. Plus, I've got 3 trips now planned to talk about economic development, about bringing some other companies into Alabama. I want to work with the President administration, help them any way I can. They've got a great program up there now, but anything that we can do to keep that going. 5 out of 7 years, we led the nation in economic development, and it really is something that I think we can continue and make it even better than it's ever been.
I said I'd keep you about 20 minutes, and I think we were right.
Governor, I got
Good.
one question.
All right.
What's that?
One.
Uh-oh, here it comes.
Are you gonna ride motorcycles again or not?
Absolutely. I actually stopped by the Harley place the other day and picked out another one. One of the things that I hope I can do, if the Lord will allow it to happen, is finish that.
Seattle to.
Yeah, from Seattle back down to San Francisco. Everyone who has ever ridden that said it really is probably one of the most scenic areas of the United States, where you just drive the Pacific Coast Highway all the way down. And that's something I'd like to do again.
We're looking at a couple of years from now.
Spring of next year sounds pretty good.
But Mrs. Riley may say different.
Yeah, how was the family's reaction to, well, before you even cranked up to head off to Alaska, what was the family's reaction to that?
You know, we sat down and talked about it. I hope no one ever just kind of lives their life afraid of something bad happening. Like I said, I've been riding bikes for years, and this is the first accident I've ever had, and it's like anything else. You know, when you really look forward to something, when you really enjoy it, it's like riding a horse. I've been thrown off a horse probably 10 or 15 times in my lifetime, but I still love to ride.